The Florida night air wasn't just a temperature, it was a physical presence. Dense, scented with night-blooming jasmine and sea salt, it wrapped around the skin like a warm silk sheet. Aurora felt a drop of sweat slowly trace the line of her spine, hidden beneath the emerald fabric of her satin dress. She stood on the coral stone balcony of Villa Vizcaya, a historic mansion on the edge of Biscayne Bay in Miami, desperately trying not to look like the fraud she felt she was. The wedding of her former University of Miami roommate, Tiffany, to an heir of the hotel industry was the event of the season in Coconut Grove. Yachts were anchored at the private breakwater, swaying gently under the moonlight. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with silver trays loaded with stone crabs and glasses of Cristal champagne that sweated with condensation. Aurora, on the other hand, was an antique book restorer who worked in the basement of a museum in Little Havana. Her dress wasn't a Vera Wang or an Oscar de la Renta, like those of the women laughing loudly in the air-conditioned ballroom inside. It was a vintage find from a thrift store in Wynwood that she had adjusted herself on her mother's sewing machine. The dark green satin fell well over her curves, but she knew that in that crowd of diamonds and perfect plastic surgery, she was merely an exotic and displaced detail. "Damn humidity," she whispered to herself, fanning her face with her hand, feeling the curls of her hair starting to rebel against the pins. She needed air. The ballroom was suffocating, not because of the temperature, but because of the weight of judgmental stares and conversations about trust funds that she couldn't keep up with. Aurora walked to the stone balustrade, looking out at the dark water of the bay. The reflection of the full moon danced on the surface, breaking into 1,000 pieces of silver. She closed her eyes for a second, allowing herself just to breathe, away from the loud music and forced laughter. "You know you're the only real thing in this entire place, don't you?" The voice was deep, drawling, with a raspy texture that made the hairs on the back of Aurora's neck stand up instantly. It wasn't a voice that asked for permission, it was a voice that took up space. Aurora turned, startled, and the air seemed to flee her lungs. Leaning against a stone column, in the shadows where the torchlight didn't fully reach, stood a man. He wasn't wearing the standard black tuxedo that all the other guests wore. He wore a light linen suit, perfectly cut for broad shoulders, and held a predatory stance. The white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the tan skin of his neck, and he held a low glass with an amber liquid and ice. He was devastatingly handsome, but in a dangerous way. Dark hair swept back, a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite, and eyes. Aurora couldn't distinguish the color in the dark, but she felt their weight. They traveled over her body not with cheap lust, but with a slow and deliberate appreciation, as if he were evaluating a rare work of art. "Excuse me?" Aurora managed to say, her voice coming out a little breathier than she intended. The man pushed off the column and took 2 steps toward her. He moved with the silent grace of a feline. His scent hit her before he even stopped beside her, an intoxicating mix of expensive tobacco, leather, and the citrus freshness of a cologne that probably cost more than her rent. "I said you're the only real thing here," he repeated, now low, intimate. He rested his elbows on the balustrade, standing dangerously close to her, but without touching her. He looked at the illuminated ballroom. "Look at them." Plastic smiles, rehearsed conversations, rented diamonds. "It's all theater." He turned his face to her, and the moonlight finally revealed his eyes. They were blue, of an electric and cold shade that contrasted violently with the heat of the night. "But you," he continued, his gaze dropping to her lips and then rising again. "You're out here, in the heat, feeling the breeze, with your hair fighting the humidity and a dress that looks like it was made to be taken off slowly, not to be displayed in a magazine." Aurora's face burned. The comment was audacious, bordering on improper, but the way he said it, with languid elegance and absolute certainty, made it sound like the most seductive compliment she had ever heard. "This dress is vintage," she replied, lifting her chin, an automatic defense. "I tailored it myself." The man smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, it was a crooked smile, loaded with secrets. I know, he said, taking a sip of his drink, the ice tinkling softly. That's why it fits you perfectly. Because it wasn't made by a machine en masse. It has your hands on it. Aurora felt her knees go weak. Who was this man? You're fleeing the party too, she observed, trying to regain some control of the situation. Does the theater not please you? The theater bores me, he corrected, turning fully toward her. He was tall, blocking the view of the party, creating a small, private world just between the two of them and the sea. I came out here looking for a place to smoke, but I found something much more interesting. He extended his free hand. Riley Sterling. Aurora looked at his hand. Large, long fingers, palms calloused in a way that didn't fit a man in a linen suit at an elite wedding. Aurora, she replied, placing her hand in his. The touch was electric. His hand was warm and firm, wrapping around hers with a subtle possessiveness. He didn't let go immediately. Instead, his thumb brushed softly against the sensitive skin of her wrist, sending a shockwave straight to Aurora's belly. Aurora, he tested the name, making it sound like a forbidden invitation. A beautiful name. Morning Light. It matches the fire I see in those dark eyes of yours. Do you flirt with every woman you find hiding on balconies, Mr. Sterling? She challenged, trying to ignore the fact that her heart was beating so hard she feared he might hear it. Riley took a step forward, blatantly invading her personal space. The heat of his body mixed with the heat of the tropical night, creating a suffocating and delicious aura. He lowered his head until his lips were inches from her ear. I don't flirt, Aurora, he whispered, his voice vibrating in her bones. I observe. I decide. And then I pursue. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, my attention has been captured. Aurora held her breath. His scent was a drug. His proximity was a threat and a promise. And what happens when you capture what you pursue? She asked, her voice trembling, daring to look directly into those predatory blue eyes. Riley pulled back millimeters, just enough to focus on her mouth. The sexual tension was so thick it seemed solid. That depends, he said, and the tone suggested sleepless nights and tangled sheets. If what I capture is as wild and authentic as it seems. I never let go. Before Aurora could answer, before she could decide whether to run or throw herself into the arms of that dangerous stranger, a shrill voice came from the ballroom. Riley, darling, where have you gotten to? Daddy is looking for you for the toast. The magic broke, but not the tension. Riley didn't look at the ballroom. He kept his eyes fixed on Aurora, as if he wanted to burn her face into his memory. Looks like duty calls, he murmured, with a trace of irritation. He took Aurora's hand again, bringing it to his lips. He didn't kiss the back of her hand, like an old-fashioned gentleman. He turned her palm up and pressed a warm, damp kiss right in the center, maintaining eye contact the whole time. The sensation was so intimate that Aurora felt her toes curl. Don't leave early, Aurora, he ordered softly, releasing her hand slowly, leaving the skin tingling. The night in Florida is long. And I'm not finished with you yet. He turned and walked back toward the light and noise, leaving Aurora alone on the dark balcony, with the sound of the sea, the scent of jasmine, and her heart beating out of rhythm against her ribs, knowing that her quiet and safe life had just been irrevocably altered. Aurora remained on the balcony for 5 more minutes, trying to get her heart rate back to something that didn't suggest imminent cardiac arrest. She looked at the palm of her hand, where the sensation of Riley's lips still burned like an invisible brand. Get a grip, Aurora, she muttered, adjusting the strap of her dress. He's a Sterling. He probably does this with every woman who doesn't have a diamond on her finger, just to pass the time. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the salty air, and decided the night was over for her. She couldn't go back inside and pretend to be interested in caviar canapes or conversation about interest rates. She needed to go home, to the safety of her old books and her cat, Hemingway. But leaving required crossing the ballroom. Aurora slipped through the glass doors, mentally grateful for the thermal shock of the air conditioning that dried the sweat on the back of her neck. The hall was now darker, illuminated by crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light onto the dance floor. She tried to stick to the shadows, skirting the tables, but his voice stopped her again. This time, it wasn't a whisper in her ear, but a voice amplified by a microphone. "And to my sister, Tiffany, who has always gotten what she wanted, including this spectacular wedding." Aurora froze. Sister? She looked at the stage. Riley was there, holding a glass of champagne. Under the spotlight, he looked even more devastating. The light linen suit, which seemed casual outside, now gave him an air of tropical royalty, a king relaxed on his throne. He smiled at the crowd, that crooked smile, charming and dangerously fake. But then, as if sensing her presence, his blue eyes swept the room. They ignored the socialites, the businessmen, the waiters, and stopped, with laser precision, on her. Aurora felt the impact of that gaze from across the room. Riley's smile changed. It lost the social politeness and gained that predatory edge she had seen on the balcony. He raised his glass subtly in her direction before drinking. That was enough. Panic, mixed with an excitement she didn't want to admit, propelled her. She turned on her heel and marched toward the main exit. The entrance lobby of Villa Vizcaya was congested. Valets ran to fetch Bentleys and Ferraris. Aurora grabbed her phone, opening the rideshare app. 15 minutes to arrival. Surge pricing, $45. Damn it, she hissed. The price was half of what she spent on food for the week. But she couldn't stay there. She began to walk down the long gravel driveway, flanked by ancient statues and fountains, deciding to wait for the car outside the gates, where perhaps the GPS would find her easier. Her heels sank slightly into the stones, and the humidity was already gluing the dress to her thighs again. A low, guttural roar cut through the sound of the crickets. Headlights, white and blinding, swept over her back. Aurora stepped onto the grass to give way, but the car didn't pass. It stopped smoothly beside her. It was a vintage convertible, a black Jaguar E-Type, elegant and aggressive like a metal panther. The engine purred with contained power. The passenger window rolled down. Riley Sterling was at the wheel, one hand relaxed on the leather steering wheel, the other resting on the door. "You don't know how to follow orders, do you, Aurora?" he said, his voice competing with the engine. "I said not to leave." "And I don't work for you, Mr. Sterling," she retorted, keeping her pace, though her legs were begging to stop. "Besides, my ride is coming." Riley accelerated just enough to match her pace, the car gliding like a predator circling prey. "Cancel it." "No." Aurora, his tone dropped an octave. It was authoritative, but there was a note of amusement. "You're walking in the dark, in shoes that are clearly hurting your feet, waiting for a car that's going to smell like cheap pine air freshener. Get in." Aurora stopped and looked at him. "You're the bride's brother. You can't leave the wedding." Riley shrugged, a fluid movement of broad shoulders under the linen. "I already did the toast. I already kissed my mother's cheek. I already threatened the groom in case he hurts her. My contractual family obligations have ended. Now, I'm collecting what the night owes me." "And what does the night owe you?" "Your company." He leaned over and opened the passenger door from the inside. The car's interior was caramel leather and smelled like him. It was an irresistible invitation. Aurora looked at the app on her phone. Driver canceled. Searching for another. With a sigh of defeat and a tremor of anticipation, she got into the car. The seat enveloped her like a glove. Riley smiled, satisfied, and put the car in gear. They exited the mansion gates, leaving the party behind, and entered the dark road covered by giant banyan trees. The wind messed up Aurora's hair, but the sensation was divine. The oppressive heat dissipated with the speed. Riley drove with arrogant competence, one hand on the wheel, the other on the stick shift, changing gears with precision. "Where to?" he asked, without looking at her. "Little Havana. Near Calle Ocho." He didn't blink, didn't make any comment about the social distance between Coconut Grove and her neighborhood. He just nodded and made the turn. "So, Aurora," he began, his voice soft now that the wind had lessened as they entered the city. "What does a woman who tailors her own dresses and flees millionaire parties do for a living?" "I restore books," she said, looking at his profile. The light from the street lamps passed rhythmically over his face, illuminating and shading his strong features. Riley glanced at her quickly, eyebrows raised. "Restorer. You save old things." "I preserve history," she corrected. "Things people forget or discard because they are broken. I make them last a little longer." "Fascinating," he murmured, and he seemed sincere. "I spend my days demolishing the old to build hotels of glass and steel that have no soul whatsoever." "We are natural opposites, Aurora." "They say opposites attract," she blurted out, and immediately regretted the boldness. Riley laughed, a low, raspy sound. He slowed down as the Miami traffic got denser. "They attract, yes. And when they collide, they usually cause a fire." The silence that followed was charged. Riley stretched out his right hand and, instead of going back to the gear shift, his fingers found Aurora's hand on the seat between them. He didn't hold it, he just traced the veins on the back of her hand with his fingertips, a light and teasing touch that made her breath hitch. When they arrived at her building, an old pink stucco building with wrought iron balconies, reality imposed itself again. The black Jaguar looked like a spaceship parked on that humble street. Riley killed the engine. The silence of the night was filled by salsa music coming from an open window somewhere. "Thanks for the ride," Aurora said, her hand already on the door handle. She needed to get out before she did something stupid, like invite him up. "Wait." Riley got out of the car and rounded the vehicle before she could open the door. He opened it for her and extended his hand to help her out. When she was standing on the sidewalk, his proximity was, once again, overwhelming. They were inches apart. Aurora had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. "Are you going to run away again?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't belong in your world, Riley. It was a fun night, but—" "Forget the worlds," he interrupted her, taking a step forward, cornering her gently against the warm side of the Jaguar. "I'm not interested in worlds. I'm interested in you." He raised his hand and touched her face. His thumb brushed Aurora's lower lip, tugging it slightly. She parted her mouth, an unconscious invitation. Riley lowered his head slowly, giving her all the time in the world to retreat. She didn't retreat. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was hungry. As soon as his lips touched hers, Riley took control. His hands went to her waist, pulling her against his hard body, eliminating any space. Aurora moaned softly, her hands rising to bury themselves in his hair, which was soft and silky. He tasted of whiskey, mint, and danger. He kissed her as if he wanted to devour her right there on the sidewalk of Little Havana. His tongue invaded her mouth, exploring with a possessiveness that made Aurora's knees buckle. Riley held her firm, a solid anchor in the middle of the storm. When he finally pulled away, both were panting. Aurora's lips were swollen and red. Riley's eyes were dark, dilated with desire. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a question. "Riley." "Tomorrow," he repeated, running his nose along her jawline, inhaling her scent. I'll pick you up at 10. Bring swimwear. I'm going to show you that Florida can be more than humidity and boring weddings. He pulled away, getting into the car before she could formulate an excuse. The Jaguar's engine roared back to life. Be ready, Aurora. I don't like to wait. And with one last scorching look, he sped down the street, leaving Aurora standing on the sidewalk, touching her own lips, knowing she had just entered a territory she might never want to leave. At 9:55, Aurora had already changed clothes 3 times. Her apartment in Little Havana was flooded by the relentless morning light. Hemingway, her fat orange cat, watched her from atop the bookshelf with silent judgment as she looked at herself in the stained bedroom mirror. This is ridiculous, she said to the cat. I should be cataloging that 19th century manuscript, not choosing bikinis to go out with a man whose last name is on half the buildings downtown. She finally settled on a simple terracotta red bikini, covering it with a sheer white linen beach cover-up and a wide-brimmed hat she used to protect her pale skin from the Florida sun. She looked like herself. She didn't try to look like an Instagram model. If Riley Sterling wanted reality, that's what he would get. Exactly at 10 o'clock, her phone vibrated. I'm downstairs. And I brought coffee. Aurora went down the stairs, her heart beating a fast salsa rhythm. When she opened the building door, the heat of the sidewalk hit her, but she barely noticed. Riley was leaning against the side of an immaculate black Range Rover. The linen suit from the night before had disappeared. He wore a simple white t-shirt that stretched over his broad chest and navy blue swim trunks that showed strong, tanned legs. Aviator-style sunglasses hid his eyes, but the crooked smile gave away that he liked what he saw. He pushed off the car and held out a thermal cup to her. Cuban coffee. From the Ventanita on the corner. I asked for little sugar, how you must like it. Aurora took the cup, surprised. How do you know how I like my coffee? You restore old books, Aurora. You have patience and like bitter and complex things. Too much sugar would ruin that. He opened the door for her. Let's go. The sea doesn't wait. The trip to the private marina in Coconut Grove was quick. Riley drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the center console, dangerously close to her leg. The tension from the previous night hadn't disappeared with the daylight, it had only changed form, becoming brighter and more exposed. When they arrived at the dock, Aurora expected a gigantic yacht with a crew. What she saw was an elegant Italian sports speedboat, white and silver, with caramel leather upholstery. It was a boat made for speed and intimacy. No captain? She asked, as Riley jumped onto the deck and extended a hand to help her down. I don't like an audience, he replied, holding her waist firmly to steady her as she stepped onto the boat. For a second, he didn't let go, and the smell of sunscreen and sea emanating from him made her dizzy. Today it's just us. Riley cast off the lines efficiently, started the engines, which roared like waking beasts, and guided the boat out of the marina. As soon as they hit the open bay, he accelerated. The boat cut through the waves of Biscayne Bay like a knife. The wind snatched Aurora's hat, which she held tight against her chest, and let her hair loose, making it fly wildly. Riley looked at her and laughed, a genuine sound of joy that made him look 10 years younger and much less cynical. He seemed to be in his element, in control, free, powerful. 20 minutes later, the deep blue of the channel gave way to a crystalline, shallow turquoise. Riley slowed down and anchored near an isolated sandbar, far from the tourist crowds of South Beach. The water was so clear Aurora could see the starfish on the white sand bottom. Silence fell over them, broken only by the soft sound of water lapping against the hull and distant seagulls. We're alone, Aurora observed, looking at the empty horizon. That's the idea. Riley turned off the engine and swiveled the pilot's seat to face her. He took off his sunglasses, and those electric blue eyes pinned her. Take off the cover-up, Aurora. The order was soft, but it made her blood run faster. Aurora hesitated. The sunlight was relentless. There were no shadows to hide in. Slowly, she unbuttoned the linen shirt and let it slide off her shoulders. Riley's gaze was physical. It traveled over every inch of exposed skin, her décolletage, the curve of her waist, her hips rounded by the red bikini. He didn't look at her as if looking for flaws. He looked at her like a starving man before a feast. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice hoarse. He stood up and walked over to her. The boat rocked slightly with his movement. He stopped behind her, and Aurora felt the heat of his body on her back. "You have fair skin," he said, his voice close to her ear. "The sun here is cruel. You need protection." He picked up the bottle of sunscreen. "I can put it on," Aurora started to say, but her voice failed. "I know you can. But I want to put it on." He put a generous amount of cream in his hands, rubbing them together to warm the product. When his hands touched Aurora's bare shoulders, she had to close her eyes and bite her lip not to moan. Riley's hands were large, rough, and incredibly gentle. He spread the cream with slow, circular movements, massaging the tension in her neck, going down her shoulder blades, tracing the line of her spine. It was a practical task turned into an act of pure seduction. "Relax, Aurora," he whispered. "You're too tense. You carry the world on these back." He slid his hands to the sides of her body, thumbs brushing the skin just below the bikini bra line. The touch was possessive. He was claiming every piece of skin he touched. "Riley." She sighed, her head falling back, resting against his firm chest. "What is it?" he murmured, kissing the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "This isn't fair." "I never said I played fair." He turned Aurora in his arms so they were face to face. The space on the boat was small, forcing their bodies to align. He looked at her face, flushed by the sun and excitement. "Let's go into the water," he said, before the tension exploded. "Before I decide I don't need to swim to cool off." He jumped into the water first, a clean dive, and emerged shaking his hair like a sea god. The water hit at his chest level. "Come." Aurora went down the stern ladder. The water was warm, silky. As soon as her feet touched the soft sand, Riley was there. He pulled her to him. In the water, gravity seemed not to exist. Aurora put her hands on his wet shoulders, feeling the hard muscles under the cool skin. Riley put his hands on her waist, his fingers moving up and down her wet skin. "Do you know why I brought you here?" he asked, his wet face shining under the midday sun. "To seduce me in a place where I can't escape by Uber?" she joked, trying to maintain some defense. Riley laughed, but his eyes grew serious. "Because out here, it doesn't matter who my father is, how much money is in my account, or which hotel I have to open next week. Here, we are just two bodies in the water." He pulled her closer, until her chest touched his. The water floated her legs, and instinctively Aurora wrapped them around his waist to steady herself. Riley's breath hitched with the intimate contact. "You are dangerous, Aurora," he said, his voice low and raspy. "You make me want to forget everything else." "Maybe you should," she whispered, bravery taking over her. Riley didn't need more encouragement. He kissed her there, in the middle of the ocean, with the sun burning above them and the cool water all around. It was a salty, wet, desperate kiss. His hands moved down to her thighs, squeezing tightly, keeping her anchored to him. Aurora clung to him, feeling, for the first time, not like the shy book restorer, but like the protagonist of a story that was just beginning to be written, and promised to be an unforgettable read. The afternoon in Florida is a temperamental mistress. One moment the sky is an infinite blue, the next, it transforms into a purple and gray bruise, heavy and threatening. They were heading back when the sky broke. Riley accelerated the speedboat, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, as the wind turned from a warm breeze into cold gusts that whipped Aurora's hair. The first drops of rain, thick and hot, began to fall like bullets on the fiberglass of the boat. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of the engine and the thunder that shook the Miami horizon. Aurora grabbed the windshield, adrenaline mixing with the salt on her skin. There was something primal about watching Riley command the boat against the storm. He didn't look worried, he looked focused, in total control of the chaos. They didn't go back to Coconut Grove. Instead, Riley turned sharply toward the Miami River, cutting through the choppy waters until reaching a private pier at the foot of a mirrored glass skyscraper in Brickell. "Let's go," he ordered, killing the engine and pulling her by the hand as soon as they docked. They ran along the pier under the torrential rain. In seconds, they were soaked. Aurora's linen dress clung to her body, transparent and ruined, but she was laughing. There was a wild freedom in it, running barefoot with a billionaire under a tropical storm. They entered the private lobby through a biometric side door. The air conditioning hit Aurora like a wall of ice, making her shiver violently. Riley noticed immediately. Without saying a word, he pulled her into the private elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. While the cab rose in silence, he positioned himself in front of her, blocking the cold air vent with his own body, creating a human heat shield. He looked at her. Her wet hair, mascara slightly smudged, chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. "You look like a wet stray cat," he teased, but his fingers brushed a lock of wet hair from her forehead with a devastating tenderness. "And you look like you just walked out of a cologne commercial," she retorted, teeth chattering. The doors opened directly into the living room. If Aurora's apartment was a cozy nest of paper and wood, Riley's was a fortress of ice. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the storm swallowing the city. The floor was white marble, the furniture was minimalist Italian design, and there wasn't a single photo, a single book out of place. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely soulless. "Welcome to my gilded cage," he said, with bitter irony, noting her look. He guided her down the hall. "The master bath is there. There are hot towels and a robe. Take a hot shower, Aurora. I'll use the guest bath." 20 minutes later, Aurora came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a charcoal gray Egyptian cotton robe that was too big for her. She smelled of his soap, sandalwood and something citrus. The hot bath had calmed her tremors, but the anxiety was returning. What was she doing there? She found Riley in the kitchen. He had also showered and changed clothes, now wearing black sweatpants and a worn gray t-shirt that looked to be the most comfortable thing he owned. He was pouring 2 glasses of red wine. The storm beat furiously against the windows, isolating them from the rest of the world. "Better?" he asked, handing the glass to her. "Much. Thank you." Aurora took the wine and walked to the gigantic window. Down below, the lights of Miami shone blurred by the rain. "It's an impressive view," she commented. "It's lonely," he corrected, stopping right behind her. "From up here, people look like ants. Problems seem small. It's easy to forget that real life is happening down there." Aurora turned around. "Is that why you like broken things?" Riley asked, studying her face. "Because they are real? I like things that have a story," she replied softly. "This place is beautiful, Riley. But it feels like no one lives here. It looks like a showroom." Riley let out a dry laugh and took a long sip of wine. "That's exactly what it is. A showroom for the Prince of Sterling hospitality. Everything here was decorated by a firm. I didn't even choose the pillows." He placed the glass on the marble counter and took a step toward her, the energy shifting from melancholic to intense. "Do you know what the only thing in this apartment is that I actually chose? The only thing I really want to be here?" Aurora held her breath, her heart beating hard against her ribs. "What?" "You." Riley reached out and held her waist, pulling her into the space between his legs. The thick fabric of the robe was the only barrier between her skin and his body. "You are here, Aurora, in the middle of my sterile and cold world, and suddenly everything seems to have color." Before she could answer, a shrill sound cut the air. Riley's cell phone, forgotten on the kitchen island, was ringing. He closed his eyes, an expression of pain and annoyance crossing his face. He didn't move to answer. "It will ring until it goes to voicemail," he muttered, without letting her go. "It could be important," she whispered. "It's my father. He wants to know why I left the wedding before socializing with the Japanese investors. He wants to know if I am focused. The phone stopped. Silence returned, heavier. "You don't like the life you have, Riley," Aurora stated. It wasn't a question. "I hate every second of it," he admitted, opening his eyes. The honesty in those blue irises was brutal. "I'm good at it. I'm good at making money, closing deals, smiling for the cameras. But I feel like an actor playing a role I never chose." He slid his hand up the back of her neck, holding her firmly. "Until last night. When I saw you on that balcony, looking like you'd rather be anywhere but there. I saw a lifeboat." "I am not a lifeboat, Riley," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though his touch was melting her rationality. "I am just a woman who likes old books and lives in an apartment that fits inside your living room. You are the woman who challenged me. The woman who wasn't impressed by my last name. The woman who tastes of the sea and Cuban coffee." He lowered his head and kissed her. This time it wasn't an attack like the night before, nor an explosion of lust like in the sea. It was a slow, deep, almost devotional kiss. Riley kissed her as if he were drinking from her, seeking the oxygen missing in his glass tower. Aurora's hands went up to his chest, feeling the strong beats of his heart through the thin t-shirt. Her robe loosened a bit. Riley's hands slid inside the opening, touching the warm skin of her waist, moving up her ribs. "Stay," he whispered against her mouth. "Don't leave when the rain stops. Stay tonight. Let me pretend, for a few hours, that this is my real life." Aurora looked at him. She saw the arrogance, yes, but she saw the abysmal loneliness behind it. And she saw the raw, honest desire. She knew this was dangerous. She knew that falling in love with Riley Sterling would be like walking voluntarily into a hurricane. But, in that moment, with the storm roaring outside and his heat enveloping her, she didn't want to be anywhere else. She untied the belt of the robe, letting it open, revealing herself to him. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied. Riley let out a sound that was half moan, half roar, and lifted her up, setting her on the marble kitchen island, knocking over the empty wine glass in the process. The glass shattered on the floor, but neither of them looked. In that perfect and untouched apartment, they were the only beautiful mess. And Riley was about to show her that, beneath the facade of ice, he burned hotter than the Florida sun. The morning light in Miami doesn't ask for permission, it invades. Aurora woke up with the sun reflecting off the ocean below and flooding Riley's bedroom with a white, clinical brightness. She blinked, disoriented for a moment, feeling the absurd softness of thousand thread-count sheets against her bare skin. The spot next to her was empty, but the pillow still held the imprint of his head. She sat up, pulling the sheet to cover her chest, and the movement made her body ache in a sweet, heavy way, a physical memory of the hours they had spent in that bed. Riley hadn't just been intense, he had been insatiable, as if trying to make up for years of emotional starvation in a single night. "Good morning." Aurora turned. Riley was standing in the balcony doorway, wearing only silk pajama pants that hung loose on his hips. He held a cup of coffee and stared at the horizon, but turned when he heard her stir. Without the armor of his expensive suits or the defensive posture he used in public, he looked different. Younger. Less untouchable. There were faint red marks on his back, left by her fingernails, and seeing them made Aurora's face heat up. "I didn't want to wake you," he said, walking to the bed and sitting on the edge. The mattress dipped with his weight. "I thought you needed rest after everything." He held out the cup to her. Black coffee. No sugar, but strong. Aurora took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." Riley didn't move away. He stayed watching her drink, with an unreadable expression in his blue eyes. Then, he reached out and traced the line of her collarbone with his thumb. "I have a meeting in an hour," he said, and the irritation in his voice was evident. "The board is in a panic because the prodigal son disappeared from his sister's wedding." "Are you going to be in trouble?" Aurora asked, feeling reality start to pierce the bubble they were in. "Nothing I can't solve with a check or a fake smile," he shrugged, but his eyes remained fixed on her. "The problem is I don't want to go. I want to stay here, lie in this bed with you, and order room service until the sun goes down again." Aurora smiled, placing the cup on the bedside table. "That sounds tempting. But I think the Prince of Hospitality has responsibilities." Riley sighed, a deep sound of resignation. He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, lazy kiss that tasted of coffee and morning. "Take a bath, eat something. The kitchen is full. I'm going to take a quick shower in the other bathroom and get dressed." When he left the room, Aurora got up. She found her linen dress dry and folded perfectly on a chair, Riley's doing, no doubt, but it still looked wrinkled and out of place in that sterile environment. She put his robe back on and left the room. She didn't want to stay alone there, but curiosity was stronger. While Riley was in the shower, Aurora walked through the silent apartment. It really was a showroom. There were no books on the shelves, only decorative vases. The refrigerator had imported water, champagne, and condiments that looked like they had never been opened. She was about to go back to the bedroom when she saw a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall, near the service entrance. It was the only room she hadn't seen the night before. She pushed the door lightly. It wasn't a guest room. It wasn't an executive office. It was a drafting studio. And, unlike the rest of the apartment, this room was alive. There were drafting tables covered with unrolled architectural blueprints. The floor was littered with crumpled balls of paper. The walls were covered with charcoal and pencil sketches. The smell there was different: graphite, old paper, and eraser. Aurora entered, fascinated. She approached the main table. The drawing pinned to it wasn't of a skyscraper hotel or a luxury resort. It was a sketch of an old Art Deco building in South Beach, the Carlisle, perhaps, but reimagined. Instead of demolishing and modernizing, the drawing showed a careful restoration, preserving the original facade but integrating vertical gardens and open community spaces. There were other drawings. A public park in Little Havana. A community library integrated with nature. They were beautiful, human, soulful projects. They were the opposite of everything Sterling Corp built. "You shouldn't be here." Aurora jumped, turning quickly. Riley was in the doorway. He was already dressed for battle, impeccable navy blue suit, starched white shirt, gold cufflinks. His hair was slicked back, wet and severe. The CEO mask was back, and he looked tense. "Sorry," Aurora said, but didn't back down. She gestured to the drawings. "Riley, this is incredible." He entered the room, walking stiffly to the table and starting to roll up the main project. "They're just doodles. Hobbies. Nothing that generates profit." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Aurora approached and placed her hand over his, stopping him from hiding the drawing. Riley, this isn't a hobby. This is passion. You are restoring history on paper, exactly like I do with books. He stopped. He looked at her hand on his, then at her eyes. The stiffness in his shoulders lessened a bit. My father calls this expensive sentimentality. He says land in Miami is too valuable to spend on gardens and historical preservation. We build height, Aurora. We sell ocean views, not nostalgia. Then your father is an idiot, she said simply. Riley blinked, surprised. Then, a short laugh escaped him. Yes. He is. He looked at the drawing, and for the first time, Aurora saw pride in his eyes, mixed with shame. I wanted to be an architect, he confessed, his voice low. Not a real estate developer. I wanted to create spaces where people lived, not where they just slept for $500 a night. But when you are a Sterling, the path is already laid out before you are born. Paths can be changed, Aurora said softly. Especially when you are the one holding the pen. Riley looked at her with an intensity that made the air in the studio seem thin. You are dangerous to me, Aurora, he said again, but this time there was no fear in his voice, only a realization. You make me want to break things. Contracts, expectations, legacies. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a quick, hard, almost desperate kiss. The intercom rang, a sharp, intrusive sound. Mr. Sterling, the doorman's voice sounded metallic. Your driver is ready. And your father is on line 1, demanding to speak to you before you get in the car. Riley pulled away, the mask of coldness sliding back into place, but he held Aurora's hand for a second longer. I have to go. My driver will take you home. I can grab an Uber, she started. No. The tone admitted no argument. You go with my driver. And Aurora. He went to a drawer in the drafting table, took out a simple silver key, and placed it in her hand. What is this? She asked, looking at the cold metal. It's the key to the service entrance. The biometric is for guests and business. This key is for when you want to escape the world. Riley, I can't accept this. We've known each other for 2 days. I don't care if it's 2 days or 2 centuries, he said, walking to the door. He stopped and looked at her over his shoulder, his silhouette cut against the light of the hallway. Keep the key. Use it. Or throw it away. But know that this studio, and this apartment, are the only things I have that are true. And now, you know the secret of both. He left, leaving Aurora alone in the middle of the drawings of a life he dreamed of having, with the key to his gilded cage weighing in the palm of her hand. Tuesday in Little Havana had its own rhythm, marked by the smell of roasted coffee and the sound of dominoes slamming onto tables at Maximo Gomez Park. In the basement of the small historical museum, however, time seemed suspended. Aurora was hunched over a worn wooden workbench, illuminated by a magnifying lamp. The air down there was cool and smelled of aged paper, starch paste, and vanilla, the chemical scent of lignin decomposing, which to Aurora was the most comforting perfume in the world. She was trying to restore the spine of a 1920 maritime logbook, but her hands, usually steady as a surgeon's, were shaking slightly. The silver key weighed heavy in the pocket of her canvas apron. Every time she moved, the metal brushed against her thigh, a cold, physical reminder that just a few hours ago, she was in the bed of one of the most powerful men in Miami. You've been staring at that page for 20 minutes, Aurora, said Sophia, the assistant curator, passing by with a box of files. The book isn't going to fix itself unless you developed telekinesis over the weekend. Aurora blinked, snapping out of her trance. I'm just assessing the integrity of the paper, she lied badly. Sophia laughed, adjusting her glasses. Right. Assessing. Just like you were assessing the ceiling for the last 3 hours. Who is he, Aurora? Before Aurora could formulate a denial, the service doorbell, the discreet entrance in the back that opened to the alley, rang. It was a shrill sound that usually announced supply deliveries. "I'll get it," Aurora said, grateful for the distraction. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the heavy metal door. She expected a FedEx delivery driver or maybe the janitor. When she opened the door, the humid heat of the afternoon invaded the coolness of the basement. And along with it, a tall, broad silhouette blocking the sun. Aurora held her breath. Riley Sterling was standing in the service alley, between trash cans and stacked cardboard boxes. He looked exhausted. The impeccable navy blue suit from the morning now looked like armor that was too heavy. His tie was loose, collar unbuttoned, and the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, veiny forearms. He held a greasy brown paper bag in one hand and his jacket thrown over his shoulder with the other. "Riley?" Aurora whispered, looking sideways to see if anyone had seen him. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to breathe," he said simply. His voice was hoarse, scratched by hours of negotiations. "And I discovered that the air on the 40th floor of Sterling Tower is unbreathable today." He looked at the dark interior of the basement behind her. "Can I come in? Or does your museum have a policy against corporate refugees?" Aurora stepped back, making room. "Come in fast. Before the humidity ruins the 18th century maps." Riley entered. As soon as the door closed, blocking out the city noise, he let out a long sigh. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. "Old books," he murmured, opening his eyes and looking at Aurora. The blue of his eyes seemed softer in the dim light of the basement. "That's what you smell like. Time. It's peaceful." "It's dust and decay, Riley," she corrected, crossing her arms, trying not to notice how his presence made the space seem tiny. "Did you flee another meeting?" "Worse. I fled a lunch with Saudi investors who want to turn a historic Art Deco block into a glass shopping mall." He made a face of disgust. "My father loved the idea. I felt like flipping the table." He held up the paper bag. "So, instead of committing corporate homicide, I brought Fritas." Aurora couldn't hold back the smile. "Fritas? The Sterling heir eats burgers from a bag?" "They're from a Cuban diner on the corner. Fritas with chorizo." He walked to her workbench and placed the bag next to the old book, with surprising care not to touch the artifact. "And I brought some for you because I assumed you forgot to eat lunch." "You assumed right." Riley pulled up a high metal stool and sat down. He looked ridiculously out of place there, a lion in a library, but at the same time, he looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. They ate right there, sharing the greasy, delicious snack, shoulder to shoulder at the workbench. Riley watched everything with genuine curiosity. "What is this?" he asked, pointing to her tools, scalpels, bone folders, fine brushes. "Surgical tools," she replied, wiping her mouth with a paper napkin. "The patient is that book there. A cargo log from 1920. The spine broke." "Show me," he asked. "Show me how you do it." Aurora hesitated. No one was ever interested in the tedious details of her work. But Riley was looking at her with that focused intensity, the same one he used when he looked at her naked. She went back to work. She took the brush, applied a thin layer of methylcellulose to the exposed fibers of the paper, and began to realign the torn page with tweezers. It was work of millimeter precision. Riley didn't say a word. He just watched. Suddenly, Aurora felt his touch. He didn't interrupt her. He just placed his large, warm hand at the base of her back, over the apron fabric. His thumb began making slow, rhythmic circles on her spine. It was a supportive, connecting touch, but it carried an electric charge that made Aurora have to concentrate double hard not to shake the tweezers. "You have incredible hands," he whispered, his voice close to her ear. "So delicate. So patient." Aurora glued the last fiber and released the breath she was holding. She put down the tweezers and turned on the stool, facing him, her legs brushing against his knees covered by the fine suit fabric. "Did you come here just to watch me glue paper, Riley?" Riley shook his head. He brought his hand to her face, taking off the protective glasses she was wearing and placing them on the bench. "I came here because I spent the entire morning surrounded by people who only see dollar signs and square footage. I needed to see something real." He ran his thumb over her cheek, where there was a small smudge of archival dust. "I needed to remember that there is a world where people fix things instead of throwing them away." He leaned in, and Aurora thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I'm tired, Aurora. Tired of pretending." His vulnerability broke any defense Aurora still had. She lifted her hands and placed them on his neck, feeling the tension in his muscles. She began to massage gently, her fingers finding the stress knots at the base of his skull. Riley let out a low groan, almost imperceptible, and relaxed against her touch. "Stay here a while," she whispered. "No one will find you in the basement." "That's exactly the plan," he murmured. He opened his eyes and stared at her. The distance between their mouths was minimal. "You know what I was thinking while my father talked about rates of return?" he asked. "What?" "About that key I gave you. And if you would use it. And the fact that I desperately wanted you to be there when I got home tonight." Aurora's heart skipped a beat. "Riley, I have a life here. A job. A cat that judges me. I can't just move into your glass tower." "I'm not asking you to move in," he said, brushing his lips against hers, teasing. "I'm asking you to let me into your life. And for you to occasionally invade mine so I don't go crazy." He kissed her then. A slow, deep kiss, tasting of freeness and contained desire. His hands moved from her back to her waist, squeezing, pulling her to the edge of the bench until she was practically in his lap. In the silence of the museum, surrounded by centuries of history, the kiss felt urgent and timeless. "I have an event on Thursday," he said against her mouth, interrupting the kiss but not pulling away. "A charity gala at Vizcaya. The same place where we met." Aurora laughed nervously. "The place I fled from." "Exactly." He smiled. "Only this time, I want you to walk in through the front door. With me. I want to introduce the woman who restores books and eats chorizo to Miami society. They'll eat me alive, Riley. Let them try." His voice grew dark, protective. "They'll find out I bite back. And that you are the only valuable thing in the room." He kissed her neck, making her arch her back. "Say yes, Aurora. Give me a reason to endure the rest of the week." Aurora looked at the powerful man hiding in her basement, asking for her company as if it were the only thing that mattered. She felt the weight of the key in her pocket. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll go." Riley smiled, triumphant. "Good. Now, get back to work." He leaned back, crossing his arms, but his gaze was pure heat. "I have 30 more minutes before I have to go back to being Mr. Sterling. And I plan to spend every second watching you save history." Thursday arrived charged with static electricity that had nothing to do with the Florida weather. Aurora stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, smoothing the fabric of the dress she had chosen. This time, it wasn't a hastily adjusted green satin. It was a piece of liquid gold silk from the 1930s that she had found at an estate auction and meticulously restored over months. The dress was a scandal of elegance, backless, a draped neckline that suggested more than it showed, and a fit that flowed over her body like water. There were no sequins, no designer logos. It was pure, antique gold. She pinned her dark hair in a low bun, leaving a few loose strands, and painted her lips a deep red. When the doorbell rang, she knew it wasn't the building intercom. Riley didn't wait in the street. She opened the apartment door, and there he was. Riley Sterling in a black tuxedo was a lethal weapon. The cut was Italian, perfectly fitted to his broad shoulders, with a black bow tie that he, miraculously, hadn't undone yet. He stopped in the hallway, hand raised as if to knock, but froze when he saw her. His blue eyes traveled over Aurora from top to bottom, slowly, and his pupils visibly dilated. God. He exhaled, lowering his hand. I thought I was prepared. I was wrong. Is it too much? Aurora asked, feeling a sudden insecurity. It's vintage. Maybe it's too old. Riley took a step forward, entered the apartment, and closed the door behind him with a soft click. He cornered her against the wood of the door, his hands going to her waist carefully, as if she were made of blown glass. You look like an Oscar statuette that came to life and decided to kill every man with a heart attack, he whispered, nuzzling his nose against her neck. You're going to outshine every diamond in that room, Aurora. Good, she said, regaining courage with his touch. If we're entering the lion's den, I prefer to enter shining. That's my girl. The ride to Vizcaya was silent but charged. Riley's hand didn't leave Aurora's thigh for the entire journey in the back of the black limousine. When they arrived at the mansion gates, the scene was familiar, but the perspective was new. This time, Aurora wasn't entering from the side as a second-class guest. The car stopped on the red carpet. Photographers' flashes popped like lightning as soon as the door opened. Riley got out first, buttoning his jacket. He turned and extended his hand to her. Ready? He asked, eyes fixed on hers, ignoring the shouts of photographers calling Mr. Sterling. Aurora accepted his hand. Ready. When she stepped out of the car, the murmur was audible. In a sea of puffy tulle dresses and neon seasonal colors, Aurora's gold silk and classic beauty were a visual shock. Riley placed his hand at the base of her back, possessive and protective, and guided her up the stairs. The main hall was packed. The smell of lilies and old money permeated the air. As soon as they entered, heads turned. Aurora felt the weight of the stairs, the curiosity, the envy, the judgment. She lifted her chin, channeling the dignity of the ancient queens she read about in her books. Riley! Tiffany's shrill voice cut through the air. Tiffany approached, holding a glass of champagne like a weapon. She wore a hot pink dress that screamed attention. Her eyes swept over Aurora with immediate disdain. You came, Tiffany said to Riley, ignoring Aurora. And I see you brought the balcony girl? Seriously, Riley? Daddy is going to have a fit. This is a charity gala, not a Tinder date. Riley's hand on Aurora's back tensed, but his voice came out smooth and cold as dry ice. Tiffany, this is Aurora Vasquez. She is the head restorer at the Historical Museum. And she is my guest of honor. If you can't greet her with the manners our mother tried to teach you, I suggest you go see if the buffet needs restocking. Tiffany's mouth opened in a perfect O. She looked at Aurora, then at her brother's merciless face, and retreated. Pleasure, she murmured, before spinning on her heels and fleeing. Aurora exhaled discreetly. 1-0 for us, she whispered. The game has barely begun, Riley replied, but there was a proud smile on his lips. They circulated through the room. Riley introduced her to everyone, not as an accessory, but as an equal. This is Aurora. She restores the history we are too busy forgetting. He showed her off with a pride that left the socialites disconcerted. But the final confrontation was inevitable. Near the indoor fountain, surrounded by a retinue of men in gray suits, stood Victor Sterling. Riley's father was an older, harder version of his son. He had the same blue eyes, but without the warmth. He exuded power and impatience. When he saw Riley, Victor stopped talking. The circle opened. "Riley," Victor said. His voice was low thunder. "You were late. And I see you brought unapproved company." Riley didn't stop until they were face to face with the patriarch. "Good evening, Dad. This is Aurora." Victor didn't even look at Aurora. He kept his eyes on his son. "I had plans for you tonight, Riley. The senator's daughter is here. It's a strategic merger. You're playing house with a civilian at the wrong time." The term civilian was said as if Aurora were an inferior species. Aurora's blood boiled, but before she could respond, Riley let out a short, humorless laugh. "A strategic merger?" Riley repeated, loud enough for people around to stop and listen. "I am not a company asset, Dad. And I am not interested in the senator's daughter, nor in your mergers." Riley wrapped his arm around Aurora's waist, pulling her against him, a solid wall of support. "Aurora is not a civilian. She is the woman who reminded me that there is life outside your boardroom. And frankly, she has more class in this vintage dress than anyone you bought to be here tonight." Silence in the hall was absolute. No one spoke to Victor Sterling that way. Victor looked at Aurora for the first time. He evaluated her, looking for weakness, fear. Aurora held his gaze calmly, her dark eyes defiant. "You are making a mistake, boy," Victor hissed. "The only mistake I made was taking so long to stop trying to impress you," Riley retorted. He turned to Aurora, ignoring his father completely. "This party is getting suffocating. Do you dance?" "Only if it's far from here," she replied, heart beating hard with adrenaline and admiration. Riley took her hand and pulled her to the dance floor, right in the center of the room, under the giant crystal chandelier. The orchestra, sensing the tension, began to play a slow waltz. Riley put one hand on her waist and interlaced the other with hers, keeping her close. They moved together with natural fluidity, ignoring the whispers, the shocked looks of Victor and Tiffany. "You just declared war on your father," Aurora said, looking at him. "No," Riley corrected, resting his forehead against hers as they turned. "I just declared my independence. And I did it holding the most beautiful woman in the world. They'll destroy us in tomorrow's papers." "Screw the papers," Riley whispered, brushing his lips against hers, right there, in front of all the Miami elite. "Let them talk. While they talk, I'll be too busy loving you." Aurora felt tears prick her eyes. In that golden, hostile hall, in the arms of the rebel prince of Miami, she no longer felt like a fraud. She felt real. And, dangerously, hopelessly in love. "Take me away from here, Riley," she asked when the music ended. "With pleasure." Without looking back, without saying goodbye to anyone, Riley Sterling took Aurora Vasquez's hand and led her out of the ball, leaving behind the gold and the poison, toward the warm Florida night, where only the truth mattered. The black Jaguar E-Type tore down the Rickenbacker Causeway like a bullet fired in the dark. To the left, the Miami skyline glowed, a cluster of neon, glass, and money they were leaving behind. To the right, Biscayne Bay was a black void, dotted only by the navigation lights of distant boats. The night wind mercilessly undid Aurora's elegant bun, whipping strands of hair against her face and neck, but she didn't care. She threw her head back against the leather seat and laughed. It wasn't a polite gala laugh. It was a laugh of liberation, fueled by pure adrenaline from having seen the King of Miami, Victor Sterling, speechless for the first time in his life. Riley glanced at her briefly, taking his eyes off the empty road. He had ripped off his bow tie and undone the top buttons of his tuxedo shirt. The wind messed up his perfectly combed hair, making him look wild again. "You're laughing," he noted, an incredulous smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. "We just set fire to my inheritance and my social reputation, and you're laughing." "It was the most terrifying and incredible thing I've ever seen," Aurora shouted over the roar of the engine and the wind. Tiffany's face looked like she had swallowed a whole lemon. Riley laughed too, a deep sound that vibrated in his chest. He reached out his right hand and interlaced his fingers with hers over the center console, squeezing tight. "I feel light," he confessed, voice full of wonder. "I should be in a panic. I should be calling lawyers. But I can only think about how fast this car can get to the end of the island." He accelerated. They passed through the gates of Key Biscayne, where the urban jungle gave way to palm trees and darkness. The road became narrower, flanked by dense vegetation. Riley didn't stop until the road literally ended. They arrived at the deserted parking lot of Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park, at the southern tip of the island. The historic lighthouse rose in the distance, a white sentinel against the starry sky, but Riley ignored the closed after sunset signs. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was filled only by the rhythmic, constant sound of the Atlantic crashing on the beach a few meters away and the deafening song of cicadas. Riley turned in his seat, unbuckling his seatbelt. He looked at Aurora, illuminated only by the soft glow of the car's dashboard. "You know what just happened, don't you?" he asked, voice low, serious now. "My father doesn't forgive public humiliations. Tomorrow morning, he'll block my cards, freeze assets, try to destroy any independent project I have." "I know," Aurora replied, turning to face him. The gold silk of the dress rustled softly. "Are you afraid?" "No." He shook his head, and the intensity in his eyes was overwhelming. "Because for the first time, I have nothing to lose that I actually want to keep. The only thing I want is sitting in this car with me." Aurora felt her heart swell in her chest. "So what do we do now, Riley Sterling? The prince without a kingdom? Now?" Riley opened the car door. "Now we christen this freedom." He got out of the car, went around, and opened the door for her. As soon as Aurora set foot on the hot asphalt, he grabbed her by the waist and lifted her, spinning her once before setting her on the ground. But he didn't let go. "Take off your shoes," he ordered softly. Aurora kicked her designer high heels into the car. Riley took off his own patent leather shoes and socks, throwing them into the back seat without ceremony. He took off his tuxedo jacket and threw it onto the hood of the Jaguar, a flag of surrender to luxury. Holding hands, they walked onto the sand. The beach was deserted. The sand was cool and soft under Aurora's feet. The ocean stretched infinitely before them, dark and powerful. Riley stopped near the waterline, where the sea foam licked the sand. He turned to Aurora and held her face with both hands. "You were beautiful in that hull," he said. "But here? With your hair messed up by the wind, barefoot, with this gold dress looking like a shipwrecked goddess, you are the most magnificent vision of my life." "This dress is 90 years old, Riley," she whispered, feeling the tide rise and wet the hem of the precious silk. "The salt water will ruin it." "Screw the dress," he growled, lowering his mouth to hers. "I'll buy another one. I'll buy the whole museum for you. Just don't ask me to stop touching you now." The kiss was salty and desperate, fueled by the breaking of all rules. Riley pulled her against him, and Aurora felt the hardness of his body through the thin fabric of the shirt and the silk of the dress. They fell onto the sand together, not caring about the dirt or the dampness. Riley hovered over her, protecting her from the world with his body. His weight was comforting, the anchor she needed. Riley's hands roamed the bare back of the gold dress, skin against skin, sending electric shocks down Aurora's spine. "I'm going to build that building," he whispered against her neck, nibbling the sensitive skin just below her ear. The restoration project. The one you saw in the studio. Aurora arched her back, hands grabbing his shoulders, crumpling the expensive white shirt. You will? I will. I'll use my own money, what's left in my private funds that he can't touch. I'll start from scratch if I have to. He lifted his head to look at her. The moonlight reflected in his blue eyes, making them shine with feverish determination. But I need you, Aurora. I need you to remind me, every day, why it's worth saving the past instead of just selling the future. I'll be there, she promised, running her fingers through his hair, removing the sand that had stuck there. I'll be there to restore you when you break. Riley let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and kissed her again, with a passion that consumed everything. There, on the isolated beach of Key Biscayne, with the sound of waves drowning out the echoes of Miami high society, the gold silk dress was ruined by sand and salt water. The Italian tuxedo got crumpled and dirty. But as Riley Sterling loved Aurora Vasquez under the starry Florida sky, stripping her not only of the silk but of all her defenses, they knew they were building something that no money, no storm, and no tyrant father could destroy. They were, finally, real. The next morning in Little Havana didn't have the clinical glamour of the penthouse in Brickell. It had the sound of a garbage truck passing on Calle Ocho, the smell of pan tostado coming from the neighbor's window, and the weight of a fat orange cat, Hemingway, sitting judgingly on top of Riley's chest. Riley opened one eye, groaning. He was squeezed onto Aurora's vintage velvet sofa, feet hanging off the armrest. The living room floor told the story of the previous night, the tuxedo crumpled in a ball, the white shirt stained with sand, and, hanging like a war trophy over the lampshade, the gold silk dress, hardened by sea salt and irreversibly ruined. Your cat is trying to steal my soul, Riley grumbled, voice hoarse with sleep. Aurora appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a large t-shirt, his, and panties. She held 2 mugs of steaming coffee. Hemingway is an excellent judge of character, she said, smiling, but there were circles of worry under her eyes. And he knows you're homeless now. Riley sat up, dislodging the offended cat, and ran his hands over his face. The stubble darkened his jaw, giving him a dangerous and tired look. Homeless is a strong word. I prefer temporarily displaced by paternal tyranny. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table. The screen was full of notifications. 37 missed calls from Tiffany. 12 voicemails from family lawyer. Asterisk bank alert, platinum card 8890 blocked. Security alert, Sterling Tower access revoked. Riley let out a dry laugh and tossed the phone back onto the sofa. He's fast. I have to give credit to the old man. Riley took the coffee, grateful for the warmth in the mug. My corporate cards? Blocked. My penthouse key? Remotely deactivated. The Jaguar downstairs? Probably already has a repossession tracker activated, since it's in the company name. Aurora sat next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. Are you broke, Riley? Technically? He took a sip of the strong coffee. On the surface, yes. Victor froze everything linked to the family trust. He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes hadn't diminished, only changed focus. It was strategy time. But I'm not stupid, Aurora. I knew this day would come. I have accounts he doesn't know about. Investments I made with my own money, in my own name, over the years. Crypto, smaller real estate, tech stocks. So we don't need to sell Hemingway to buy food? Not yet. He kissed her forehead. But liquid cash will take a few days to transfer and be accessible. Until then. I'm a man with a $50,000 watch on his wrist and not even $10 in his pocket to buy a sandwich. Aurora got up and went to her purse on the table. She took out a worn leather wallet and pulled out a $20 bill and some change. "Here," she said, placing the money in Riley's large hand. He looked at the crumpled bills, stunned. "Aurora. It's for breakfast and gas, if the Jaguar doesn't get towed before then," she said firmly. "We're partners now, right? You bring the expensive watch and the architectural vision, I bring the lunch money and the sofa." Riley looked at the money, then at her. The arrogance of the Miami playboy disappeared completely, replaced by a raw gratitude that made him look vulnerable for the first time. "I'll pay this back," he promised, voice thick. "With absurd interest. Just build that building, Riley. The one in the drawing." "I will." He stood up, energy returning to his body. "But I need a place to work. I can't go back to my office. They'd confiscate my laptop at the entrance." Aurora looked around her small apartment. Stacked books, plants, natural light entering through the wrought iron windows. "Use the kitchen table," she offered. "The internet is decent, the coffee is unlimited, and the view is of Mr. Perez's laundromat, which is much less stressful than Biscayne Bay." Riley smiled, that crooked and devastating smile returning. "Sounds like the perfect headquarters for a revolution." The next few hours were a blur of frenetic activity. Riley transformed Aurora's dining table into a command center. He used his personal laptop, which, happily, was in the car, to move funds, make calls to trusted contractors, and lawyers who weren't on his father's payroll. Aurora went to work at the museum, but her mind stayed at the apartment. She came back at lunchtime with Cuban sandwiches, finding Riley pacing back and forth in the small living room, talking loudly on the phone, still wearing the tuxedo pants and wrinkled white shirt, barefoot. "I don't care what Victor said, Frank. The land in South Beach is in the name of the LLC I created. If he tries to place a lien, I'll sue the holding company for undue interference." "Yes. Do it." He hung up and looked at Aurora. He looked energized, alive. "Good news?" she asked, handing him the sandwich. "The land is mine." He bit into the sandwich hungrily. "The restoration project for the Carlisle?" "The building is secure. But I don't have capital to start construction now. Victor scared the banks. No one wants to lend to the disinherited son. And what are you going to do?" Riley wiped his mouth, eyes shining with a dangerous plan. "I have an asset. A single asset of real value that is out of my father's reach." "What?" "The yacht." He laughed. "The speedboat we were on. It's registered to an offshore company in the Cayman Islands that my grandmother left me. Victor can't touch it." "You're going to sell the boat?" Aurora asked, feeling a pang of sadness. That boat had been the setting of their first moment of freedom. "I am." Riley didn't hesitate. "It's worth $2 million. That's enough money to set up the office, pay for initial permits, and hire a demolition and restoration crew." He approached her, holding her shoulders. "Aurora, I'm going to sell my favorite toy to build something real. And you know what? It doesn't hurt a bit. Because you're trading a boat for a legacy," she completed. "I'm trading an escape for a life." He kissed her, fast and strong. "But I need you to do me a favor." "Name it." "I need you to go with me to the marina. If my father's security guards are there, they'll try to bar me. But if we arrive from the water side, or if we create a distraction." Aurora smiled, crossing her arms. "You want me to be the getaway driver for a heist of your own boat?" "Basically." He smiled, grabbing the Jaguar keys, which, miraculously, was still on the street. "And, Aurora?" "Yes. Bring the cat. I have a feeling Hemingway hates security guards as much as he hates me." The war against the Sterling Empire had begun, and the first battlefield would be the Coconut Grove Marina. And Riley and Aurora were ready to steal back their own future. The Coconut Grove Marina was bathed in orange and violet light of the sunset when the black Jaguar parked discreetly 2 blocks away, under the shade of a banyan tree. Riley killed the engine and looked at Aurora in the passenger seat. On her lap, inside a hot pink carrier, the only one Aurora had, Hemingway meowed a low, continuous protest. "The plan is simple," Riley said, checking his watch. "Security shift change. The main gate has 2 gorillas my father hired. They know my face, but they don't know yours. And they certainly don't know Hemingway," Aurora added, lifting the box. The cat hissed inside. "Exactly." Riley held her hand for a moment, squeezing tight. "You create chaos. I jump the side fence, get to the boat, start the engines, and come pick you up at the end of Pier C. You have exactly 3 minutes. And if they arrest me? They won't. You are a confused citizen with a hysterical cat. If it goes wrong, run to the car and meet me at Monty's. We're stealing your own boat, Riley Sterling." Aurora smiled, a mix of nervousness and excitement shining in her eyes. "This is insanity. This is business." Riley got out of the car, crouching to run toward the ivy-covered side fence. Aurora took a deep breath, smoothed the simple summer dress she had put on, and walked straight to the security booth, holding the carrier as if it were a ticking time bomb. The 2 guards, cupboards in black suits sweating under the sun, blocked the way. "Private area, ma'am," the larger one growled. Aurora channeled her best assistant on the verge of a nervous breakdown performance. "Thank God," she exclaimed, shoving the cat carrier against the guard's chest. "Did Mr. Victor Sterling send you? He said security would be here. This is his granddaughter's prize cat. He needs air conditioning right now, or he's going to have heat stroke." The guard recoiled, confused, holding the box where Hemingway, sensing the sudden movement, let out a meow that sounded like a war cry and scratched the plastic grate. "Ma'am, we have no orders about a cat." The guard started. "Do you want to call Victor?" Aurora shouted, hysterical. "He said, take the prince to the yacht now. Do you want to be responsible for the death of the prince?" While the 2 guards tried to calm the crazy woman and decide what to do with the caged beast, Aurora saw, out of the corner of her eye, a white-shirt figure scale the 10-foot fence with the agility of an Olympic athlete and disappear on the other side. A minute passed. The guards were arguing on the radio. "Central, we have a VIP feline situation here." Suddenly, a deep roar cut the air. It wasn't a cat. It was 2 800-horsepower V8 engines waking up angry. The guards turned to the water. "Hey! That's Riley's boat," the second guard shouted. Riley's silver speedboat shot out of its slip, kicking up a wall of water. Instead of heading for open sea, Riley made a tight, dangerous turn, drifting on the water and pointing the bow straight at the pier where Aurora stood. "Run!" Aurora yelled to herself. She snatched the box from the stunned guard's hands. "Forget it. I'll take him myself." She ran down the wooden pier, her shoes banging hollowly on the planks. The guards, realizing the distraction too late, started running after her. "Stop! Security!" The speedboat approached the pier, engine reversing sharply to brake. Riley ran from the cockpit to the stern platform, holding out his arms. "Jump, Aurora!" There was 5 feet of dark water between the pier and the rocking boat. Aurora didn't think. She hugged Hemingway's carrier and jumped. She landed in Riley's arms, the impact knocking both of them onto the white leather upholstery. "Go, go, go," she shouted, laughing breathlessly. Riley got up, ran to the wheel, and pushed the throttle all the way down. The bow of the speedboat reared up to the sky, and they shot away from the dock, leaving the two guards soaked by saltwater spray, shouting into their useless radios. They sped across Biscayne Bay, wind making any conversation impossible. Riley drove with a wild smile on his face, looking at Aurora and the secure cat carrier on the seat next to her. They didn't stop until they reached the Miami River, an industrial, gritty area where rusty cranes mixed with new condos. Riley docked at a private boatyard, far from the prying eyes of the luxury marina. A short, bald man wearing a white guayabera was waiting on the dock, smoking a cigar. "Lazaro," Riley greeted, throwing the rope. "Chico, you said you were in a hurry, but you didn't say you were coming flying," the man laughed, helping tie up the boat. "Is this the toy?" "It is. It's pristine. Full tank. Paperwork ready for transfer." Lazaro looked at the boat appreciatively, then at Riley. $2 million. Transfer made to the Cayman account you gave me. The money should be there already. It's a pleasure doing business with you, Lazaro. Take good care of her. Riley patted the leather dashboard of the speedboat one last time. There was no hesitation, no remorse. Just a goodbye tap. He jumped onto the dock, helped Aurora and Hemingway up, and shook Lazaro's hand. 5 minutes later, they were walking along the riverbank, sun already set, city lights turning on around them. Riley stopped under a streetlight and took out his phone. He checked the offshore account balance. "It's done," he said, releasing the breath he seemed to have been holding for days. "We have the capital. $2 million liquid." He looked at Aurora. They were sweaty, disheveled, and exhausted. She was holding a box containing a furious cat. They had no car, the Jaguar had been left behind, and would have to take a taxi to Little Havana. But Riley looked at her as if she owned the world. "You were amazing back there," he said, pulling her by her free waist. "The granddaughter's prize cat? Seriously?" "It was the first thing that popped into my head," she laughed. Riley rested his forehead against hers. "I have no boat anymore. I have no access to the family fortune anymore. And I'm probably a fugitive from my father's security. And how do you feel?" "Rich," he whispered, before kissing her passionately under the yellow light of the lamppost, with the sound of Miami sirens in the distance and a cat meowing in protest at their feet. "I feel like the richest man in the world." "Let's go home, Riley," Aurora said against his lips. "We have a building to build. And a cat to apologize to," he completed, taking the carrier from her hand. "Let's go. The taxi is on me. After all, I just closed a big deal." 3 months later, Riley Sterling no longer smelled of imported cologne and office air conditioning. He smelled of sawdust, fresh cement, and honest sweat. And, to Aurora, he had never been more attractive. It was a Tuesday afternoon at the construction site of the Arcadia, the small Art Deco building on Collins Avenue they had managed to buy, by a miracle and a lot of aggressive negotiation, before Victor Sterling's lawyers could block the sale. The building was gutted. Scaffolding covered the faded pink facade. The noise of jackhammers was the constant soundtrack. Aurora was on her knees in what would be the lobby, wearing denim overalls, a bandana in her hair, and protective goggles. She was cleaning, inch by inch, an original 1930 floor mosaic that had been covered by decades of cheap carpet and industrial glue. "Water," a voice said above her. She looked up. Riley was standing there, blocking the sun coming through the glassless windows. He wore a gray t-shirt that was soaked with sweat and clinging to his chest, jeans covered in white plaster dust, and heavy work boots. His arms, formerly pale from the office, were tanned, and his muscles looked more defined by daily manual labor. He held out a bottle of ice water to her. "Thank you," she said, accepting the bottle and drinking avidly. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt. Riley crouched beside her. He touched the smudge on her face with his thumb, smiling. "You are filthy, Ms. Vasquez. You look like you rolled in a cement mixer, Mr. Sterling," she retorted. "We're behind on the plumbing," he said, expression turning serious. "The copper supplier canceled the delivery this morning." "Logistical issues," they said. Aurora sighed. "Logistical issues with your father's last name?" "Probably. Victor is calling every supplier in town, threatening to cut contracts with Sterling Corp if they sell to us. He's trying to suffocate us, Aurora. Make the money run out before we open the doors." "How much time do we have?" "At the current burn rate? 2 months. If we don't open by the start of the winter season, the boat money runs out and we won't have cash flow." The tension hung between them. The risk was real. They had bet everything, money, reputation, sanity, on that building. "I'll solve it," Riley said, standing up. There was a hard determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "If I have to drive the truck and pick up the pipes in Orlando myself, I will. No one is stopping this construction." He turned to go back to work, but stopped when a man in a suit with a clipboard entered through the doorway, looking out of place among the workers. "City Inspector," Riley muttered, closing his eyes for a second. "Here we go." Aurora stood up and watched. The Riley of 3 months ago would have called a lawyer or tried to bribe the problem away. The Riley of now walked up to the inspector with the posture of a foreman. She couldn't hear the whole conversation, but she saw the body language. The inspector pointed to beams, shook his head, wrote things down aggressively. Riley stayed calm, presenting permits, pointing to safety standards, arguing firmly. At one point, the inspector seemed to mention something that made Riley take a step forward, invading the man's personal space. It wasn't a physical threat, but it was an assertion of authority. The inspector backed down, closed the clipboard, and left. Riley walked back to where Aurora was, running a hand through his dust-dirty hair. He wanted to embargo the site for excessive noise. In the middle of Miami Beach. Riley laughed humorlessly. "My father is running out of creativity. You handled that well." "I'm tired, Aurora," he admitted, leaning against an exposed column. "My shoulders hurt, my hands are full of calluses, and I spent half the day fighting corporate ghosts." Aurora walked to him. She didn't care about the dirt or the sweat. She put her hands on his chest and kissed him. It was a kiss of support, of "I'm here," but it quickly transformed. The heat of his body, the adrenaline of the confrontation, the shared exhaustion, it all acted as fuel. Riley groaned against her mouth, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her against his dirty body. "Let's go home," she whispered. "The mosaic can wait until tomorrow." "We can't," he said, kissing her neck, leaving a damp, hot trail that made her knees shake. "The electricity is getting turned on tonight. I need to be here to test the circuits. Then let's stay here." Night fell over the Arcadia. The workers left, leaving the building in a hollow, echoing silence. Riley flipped the main breaker. Suddenly, the lobby was flooded with warm light. The original Art Deco chandeliers, which Aurora had spent weeks polishing and rewiring, shone for the first time in decades. The yellow light reflected off the floor mosaic, revealing the vibrant colors she had rescued from the dirt. It was magical. It was physical proof that their dream was breathing. Riley looked around, eyes shining with unshed tears. "We did it," he whispered. "Look at this, Aurora. It's beautiful." "It's more than beautiful," she said, hugging him from behind. "It has a soul." Riley turned in her arms. The empty lobby, smelling of dust and victory, was the most romantic setting in the world. "Come here," he said, taking her hand. He guided her to a corner of the lobby, where he had spread some moving blankets on the clean floor. There was a box of cold pizza and 2 cheap beers. "Dinner by the light of restored crystal chandeliers," he announced, sitting down and pulling her into his lap. They ate in silence, watching the light dance on the peeling walls that would soon be painted. "You know what's going to be in that corner?" Riley pointed to an alcove near the future reception desk. "The bar?" "No." He kissed her temple. "It's going to be a library. With old books. Books that guests can read, take to the beach. Books that you will choose." Aurora felt her heart squeeze. "Riley, I want this place to have as much of you as it has of me," he said, looking into her eyes. "I build the walls, Aurora. But you give the heart. Without you, this would just be another pile of bricks." Aurora pushed the pizza box away. She straddled his lap, legs wrapping around his waist, looking at the dirty, beautiful face of the man who had abandoned an empire to build a real life with her. "I love you," she said. It was the first time the words were spoken aloud, in the middle of a construction site, smelling of pizza and cement. Riley stopped. Time stopped. "Say it again," he asked, voice hoarse. "I love you, Riley Sterling. I love the man who argues with inspectors, who carries pipes, and who dreams of libraries." Riley kissed her with a ferocity that left her breathless. He laid her down on the blankets, the hard floor under her back ignored for the heat of his body over hers. That night, on the floor of the lobby of the Arcadia, they didn't make love with the delicacy of silk sheets. It was urgent, it was raw, it was a celebration of survival and creation. Every touch was a promise that, no matter how hard Victor Sterling tried, he would never be able to tear down what they were building there. When they finally fell asleep, wrapped in the rough blankets, with the chandelier lights watching over them, Aurora knew the building was solid. The foundations were deep. And they were ready for the final storm. The neon sign lit up with a satisfying electric hum, casting a pink and turquoise glow over Collins Avenue. The Arcadia. It wasn't just a name, it was a declaration of war won. The hotel lobby, once a dusty ruin, now vibrated with life. The mosaic floor Aurora had restored on her knees shone under the warm light of the chandeliers. The air smelled of orange blossom, old books, and expensive champagne, an intoxicating mix that would become the place's signature. But unlike the party at Vizcaya months ago, this crowd wasn't made of plastic. There were famous South Beach drag queens chatting with serious architects. There were artists from Wynwood drinking with New York investors Riley had managed to convince. There was live jazz music, loud laughter, and above all, authenticity. Aurora stood at the top of the small mezzanine staircase, observing everything. She wore a midnight blue silk dress, fluid and simple, that left her back bare, and homage to that first meeting on the balcony, but without the insecurity of that night. Now, she was the queen of this castle. "Satisfied, partner?" Riley appeared beside her. He wore a cream linen suit, impeccable, but no tie. The tan from the construction work was still there, as were the calluses on his hands that now held 2 crystal glasses. "It's perfect, Riley," she said, accepting the glass. "Hemingway is sleeping on a velvet armchair in the lobby and 3 guests have already taken pictures of him thinking he's part of the chic decor." Riley laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "He's the hospitality manager. I'll have to start paying his salary in fresh tuna." They toasted, crystal clinking softly. "We did it," Riley murmured, looking at the crowd, but with his mind focused only on the woman beside him. "Without my father's money. Without his approval. Just with the sail of a boat and a lot of sweat." As if summoned by name, the atmosphere at the hotel entrance changed. The crowd parted. Victor Sterling entered. He wasn't with his usual entourage. He was alone. The patriarch looked around, critical eyes sweeping every detail: the restored ceiling, the hand-picked furniture, the vibrant atmosphere that none of Sterling Corp's sterile hotels could replicate. Aurora felt Riley tense beside her. "I'll handle this," she said, ready to defend her territory. "No," Riley held her hand. "We'll handle it." They walked down the stairs together, a united front. When they stopped before Victor, the music seemed to have turned down in volume. Victor looked at his son, then at Aurora, and finally at the hotel again. "It's small," Victor said. His voice didn't have the usual thunder, it sounded almost tired. "It's intimate," Riley corrected, calm. "It's a boutique hotel, Dad. We don't sell rooms, we sell experience. We are booked solid for the next 6 months." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Booked solid? Without corporation marketing?" "People like real stories, Victor," Aurora intervened, her voice steady. "They're tired of glass and steel. They want soul. And this place has soul." Victor looked at Aurora. For the first time, there was no disdain. There was a cold, calculating recognition that he had underestimated the librarian. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "The copper suppliers," Victor said, holding out the envelope to Riley. "The invoice has been paid. I considered it a silent investment." Riley looked at the envelope, but didn't take it. "I don't need your money, Dad. The bills are paid. The copper is in the walls. The hotel is mine and Aurora's. 100%. Victor withdrew his hand, a bitter smile curving his lips. "You are stubborn. Like your mother." "No," Riley said, looking into the eyes of the man who had dominated him his whole life. "I am free. And that is something you will never understand." Victor nodded, a short, stiff movement. "The place is impressive, Riley. Good luck." He turned and left, disappearing into the Miami night, an old king leaving the territory of the new conqueror. Riley let out a long sigh, and Aurora squeezed his hand. Did he just admit defeat? In his way? Yes. Riley turned to her, blue eyes shining with renewed intensity. But enough about him. I have a more important appointment. We do? The party is at its peak. The party can wait. Come with me. He guided her through the crowd, receiving pats on the back and congratulations, until they reached a quiet corner of the lobby, the Arcadia library. It was a cozy alcove, lined with dark wood floor-to-ceiling shelves, full of books Aurora had personally scavenged. There were soft leather armchairs and low, golden lighting. This is my favorite place, Riley said, leaning against a shelf. Because it is the soul you gave to this building. He went to a specific shelf and pulled out a book. It was a first edition of The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. The cover was worn, faded blue. I found this at an online auction, he said, handing the book to her. I thought it would be appropriate, given our cat's name and the fact that I sold my boat to fish for this dream with you. Aurora took the book with reverence. Riley, this must have cost a fortune. Open it. Aurora opened the cover carefully. The pages in the center had been skillfully cut, creating a small niche. And inside the niche, nestled in the aged paper, was a ring. It wasn't a flashy diamond like the ones Tiffany wore. It was an antique sapphire, deep blue like the ocean where they had swum that first day, surrounded by small diamonds in a 1930 Art Deco setting. Aurora lost her breath. Riley didn't kneel. It wasn't their style. They were partners, equals, side by side. He just took a step forward, covering her hands holding the book. We built a building, Aurora. We built a company. We survived hurricanes, tyrant fathers, and burst pipes. He caressed her face with his thumb. But I don't want to be just your partner. I want to be the person who wakes up with you every day and sees you full of dust and stubbornness. I want to restore every day of my life by your side. Hot tears filled Aurora's eyes, blurring the vision of the man who had changed her world. Are you asking me to sign a lifetime contract, Mr. Sterling? I am asking you to let me be yours, Aurora. No exit clauses. She took the ring from the book and handed it to him. Riley took her hand, the hand that smelled of old books and paper, and slid the sapphire onto her ring finger. It fit perfectly. Yes, she whispered, and then, louder, yes. 1,000 times, yes. He kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of victory, of promise, and of absolute passion. Around them, the party continued, the jazz played, guests laughed, but in the small library, time stopped once more. Riley picked her up, and Aurora wrapped her legs around his waist, laughing between kisses. We have a hotel to run, she reminded him, making no move to get down. The night manager can handle it, Riley murmured, walking with her toward the private elevator that led to the penthouse, the only part of the building that was strictly theirs. The hotel owner has an urgent and private meeting with his wife. Future wife. Contractual details. The elevator doors closed, blocking out the sound of the party, and began to rise. Outside, the warm Florida breeze blew through the palms on Collins Avenue. The neon sign the Arcadia hummed, constant and bright, a beacon in the night. Aurora and Riley had started as opposites on a dark balcony, the plastic prince and the guardian of the past. But there, rising toward the Miami sky, they were a single force. They hadn't just restored a building, they had restored each other. And their story, unlike Aurora's old books, didn't have a final page. It was just beginning. The end.